Welcome back into the Play-by-Play, a sports media talk show from Awful Announcing, where unlike Mike Francesa, we do remember when Joel Embiid went to Kansas. I'm Brendan Clean, staff writer at Awful Announcing. That's Drew Lerner. That means it's Wednesday. We're live for you here on March 18th, 2 o'clock Eastern, YouTube, X, Instagram, Facebook. Catch us on all of those platforms every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And if you aren't already, hit subscribe or follow to make sure you get the show. But today we've got Ken Rosenthal versus Dan Big Cat Katz, a sentence I never thought that I would say. But first, Bruce Pearl, who is serving for the first time, Drew, as Jay Wright's replacement, as the coach character on March Madness coverage, courtesy of CBS and TNT Sports here this spring, and has already made several headlines and quite the name for himself on TV in just a few short weeks. The first wrinkle of this story, and there's a lot to get to, the guy just found the most fun pre-March storyline in college basketball and decided to just shit on it. Miami, Ohio, it's a fun debate. Maybe they'll get crushed in the first round. We don't know, but they're on this undefeated streak in a mid-major conference, the type of thing we all love to follow in college basketball, and he makes it his mission to say that they shouldn't be in the tournament and ruin the fun of this awesome story. That he didn't get off on a great foot.
No, not at all. I love how you called him a coach character too, because that's like a typecast that needs to be fulfilled no matter who the available coach characters on the market are. Like, this is a seat that needs to be filled on the CBS Sports, TNT Sports coverage of March Madness. And so this year, I think Bruce Pearl is a bit of a different cat, let's say, than Jay Wright, and so it's going to take some getting used to for a lot of college
Jay
basketball
Wright was
fans.
like the ivory tower man of honor of the coaching discipline, and Bruce Pearl is like straight from the locker room, just broke a clipboard over his knee and then took a microphone and sat down at the desk.
Yeah, exactly. And you're completely right. I mean, this is probably the least popular opinion you could have in college basketball, is what he started off as someone that is diminishing the accomplishment of Miami, Ohio. And it turns out, he might be right. They lost in the quarterfinals of their conference tournament. They're like 7 or 8 point underdogs tonight in their first 4 game. So, yes, there are legitimate arguments to be made, but I think what we're going to get to here in short order is that there's a very clear reason, it seemed, at least from an outsider's perspective, why he was saying these things. And that's because his son's team and his former team, Auburn, was right on the bubble with Miami.
And I didn't see that, I don't follow college basketball intricately enough to necessarily have realized that second layer to his criticism had something to do with the Tigers, but it certainly appears that way. But yeah, being proactively anti-Cinderella was not a great start. Then you start to feel, hey, well, yeah, the team that he not only just finished coaching and is led to the Final Four and everything else, but now is coached by his son, may be looking directly at Miami, Ohio for one of these last at-large bids. And then, courtesy of AL.com down in Alabama, we come to find out, oh, by the way, he's still paid by the Auburn Tigers, which you could have assumed, but was put in to fact by a reporter down there, and quite a bit of money too, not just a token, annual bonus or something. The guy is still intimately involved with this program and being paid 6 figures for his work there. And so then he appears on the Dan Patrick Show and is basically, I would say, a good sport to actually, say something here and have to face it and do it. But we'll see what people think about how he quite defended himself here. Oh my goodness. The file's too large, Drew. I screwed myself over. I will have to read the quote of what Bruce Pearl said, which is effectively, he said if it ever becomes a problem, he would quit right away. I think that's the highlight of the thing, right? He did admit to being paid. He said it's a lot fewer money than he made as a coach. And again, if he was not able to be objective, he wouldn't continue at Auburn. And would step down immediately. Now, he went on to compare himself to Charles Barkley and the Auburn fanaticism, or Jay Wright and the allegiances to Villanova. He claimed that Jay Wright still worked at Villanova during his time at CBS. I don't know if I can fact check that here on the play-by-play live, Drew, but what did you make of Bruce Pearl and what he said to Dan Patrick here?
Well, from what I recall, that Jay Wright, I think, had some sort of title at Villanova after he stepped down. But they're a private university, so you can't go and see if he's actually getting compensated for that position at all, right? At Auburn, it's all transparent. You can go on the website right now, see from month to month exactly what Auburn University is paying Bruce Pearl. But the key difference in those two comparisons is that Jay Wright never caped for Villanova in the way that Bruce Pearl caped for Auburn on the selection show, right? And maybe there wasn't a necessity for Jay Wright to do that. I can't remember if those Villanova teams ever had a bubble situation or a seeding situation or anything that was worth discussing at length like Auburn's team this year. But immediately after the field was announced, and
Villanova kind of ended up sucking a lot of the time that Jay Wright actually was on the show, which was,
right,
I guess, good for him.
Yeah, but immediately after the bracket was revealed, we have Bruce Pearl essentially just arguing with full-throatedly for Auburn's inclusion in the tournament, saying, they'd beaten 3 conference champions that year. They, had played one of the hardest schedules in the country, and kind of, he had backtracked at this point on his Miami, Ohio point, saying, that the Red Hawks deserve to be in, but kind of taking down SMU instead, right? Saying, oh, well, SMU, they've only won 5 games away from home this year. They didn't play a very tough non-conference schedule. At no point did he mention that Auburn was a single game over 500, had lost 16 games this season, and many of which were not what you would consider quality losses. And, this is, 6 or 7 million people watch the selection show, right? Like, this is a widely viewed event. It's a big deal for college basketball fans. And the people watching this show, that they know the resumes of these bubble teams, right? They understand the arguments either way. And so for Bruce Pearl to go on the show and not really give much of a nuanced opinion on it, and really,
I do have the clip for this one if we want to play it. I did manage to get this clip.
Yeah, let's do it.
I won out here. Let's play it.
With respect to Oklahoma and Auburn, Oklahoma only 4 quad 1 wins, Auburn only 4 quad 1 wins, and then I think Auburn losing at home to Ole Miss was a quad 3 loss. They win that game, I think they're in.
That turned out to be a better game than what people thought it was going to be, because Ole Miss did so well in the SEC tournament. Auburn beat 3 champions this year. They beat Florida, they beat St. John's, and they beat Arkansas. They played the toughest schedule in the country. Don't know they were rewarded for it. It's hard to get another couple of SEC teams in when the SEC already has 10.
Yeah, and I think the losses, when you look at, we've not had a team won.
I think you're muted there, Brendan, but
it felt like an overt thing. It felt like he's being put on the spot. He's kind of the only one on that desk that appears to have a defense of Auburn, have a case for Auburn in a real way, or even care about Auburn. Like, effectively, it's kind of just another bubble team to everybody but him. And that just puts into stark reality, like, the difficulties just in general of Bruce Pearl being on this desk. And that's before you get to the Miami, Ohio nonsense or some of the other just attention grabbing stuff that Bruce Pearl likes to do.
Right. And, another one of the whataboutisms that I saw a lot on social media after this happened was that, Nick Saban is in a similar position with Alabama, right? He's still, I I guess, compensated by the university in some manner. He's obviously one of the stars of College Game Day. But it's the same thing as we talked about with Jay Wright. Like, I've never seen Nick Saban go on College Game Day and be blatantly pro Alabama, right? Maybe it's happened. Maybe I've missed it. I don't know. But Nick Saban's not on there arguing for Alabama's selection into the college football playoff or arguing for better seating for Alabama. He purports to, cover the team objectively. And that's just not what we got from Bruce Pearl.
I'm glad you brought up College Game Day, because what I think Bruce Pearl will have to learn is there's nothing college sports fans hate on their TV shows than overt bias like this. And we saw a lot of examples of it. I mean, Game Day is accused of this all the time, but we saw some incredibly high profile examples of this throughout the season with the Lane Kiffin to LSU saga that grew to include CAA and agent Jimmy Sexton and a sit down, like Oprah style interview hosted by Reese Davis, where everybody had to give a mea culpa for their connections to Jimmy Sexton on air. And Nick Saban was at the center of that as somebody who was openly giving advice and encouraging Kiffin to go to LSU, while then going on air and having to give some kind of balanced analysis, or what fans hoped would be balanced analysis. This is the stuff that's going to grate on people more than anything you could possibly say on a college sports TV show, right? And this gets me to the kind of the take here for me. So that aside, like, it's gone now. The Auburn thing's over. They didn't make it. Miami, Ohio might just lose before the tournament ever actually really gets started, and that story will be dead. I hope he learns his lesson a little bit. Don't be a sourpuss about like the cool story, like chill, But to me, I actually think he's perfect for the NCAA tournament work here, because it is for casual college basketball fans. It is for people who like to turn on the TV and know who Bruce Pearl is, who want kind of generic, off the cuff, relatively uninformed takes. There's a reason Charles Barkley works this tournament and probably watches single-digit college basketball games all season, and even that might be generous. Like, to me, I feel like we're not really talking about this side of his work, but he also made some headlines for weird and attention-grabby kind of look-at-me comments on his TNT work throughout the season. He called a couple games. He did the studio for their college basketball package. I actually think that's where the network might need to be more careful about how they use him and things like that, because that's for the diehards. They don't want the Bruce Pearl show invading their Tuesday night, watching their local team or their alma mater or the game they're betting on, and he can't get out of his own way. But for this, I actually think it's kind of the right mode to operate in, and probably, all things considered, better for the overall entertainment product than Jay Wright was.
Absolutely. I mean, this has been a tried and true strategy in a lot of sports studio shows. I mean, Fox is going to trot out Alexi Lalas for the World Cup this year. Do you think the vast majority of soccer viewers agree with what Alexi Lalas has to say on any given soccer subject? Of course not. Like, he's there to kind of stoke the fire and be controversial and be contrarian. And Bruce Pearl is perfect for that role. It's honestly something that the NCAA tournament has probably lacked in a lot of ways, but has made up for it by having, Charles Barkley and the rest of the inside guys, minus Shaq, of course, on the network, right? Like, they're entertaining in their own right and controversial in their own right at times, but people just enjoy watching them. Bruce is on the second studio, right, down in Atlanta, whereas like Chuck and all of them are on the other panel. But that kind of breathes some life into that, right? I want to say last year it was probably like Candace Parker and Seth Davis and Wally Zerbiak and those types of people. With all due respect, I like them all individually. no one is really paying attention to what
Wally
they have to
Szczerbiak's
say.
makeup game is on another level, though. I gotta say,
Yeah,
it's incredible. The eyebrows, the foundation, like he should be a model for some kind of. He should get a brand deal for the makeup.
he could definitely be a
situation
suit
that he has
model
going on
for
Yeah.
sure. But yeah, I mean,
I think you're right. Like this is, but I guess a question would be then, like, it is new. I can make the case it's better for the casual fan. It's better as an entertainment decision for them to hire Bruce Pearl, and no one's surprised that Bruce Pearl is doing any of these things, right? But like, it's going to be new, and it could, and already is, I feel like, grating on some people who are used to one thing. This is a tournament where the broadcast presentation has not changed a lot in a very long time, right? And so I wonder what that'll mean. If it probably will take some getting used to, and there will be more moments like this over the course of the tournament, courtesy of Bruce Pearl, even if, it's better for, John such and such in Nebraska who just sits down and watches a random game to be like, oh, that guy's crazy. You know what I mean? But we're not used to that. This is like the tournament of Bill Raftery and Ernie Johnson. And you know what I mean? This is not attention and personality and energy like a lot of other sports shows are.
Yeah. I think we've already seen the peak, really, because the peak for the studio is the selection show, right? Maybe until the Final Four. The rest of the tournament, it's about the games, right? No one's watching the studio show.
You change to the other game when the studio comes on.
Exactly. So I don't think it's going to be as big of a deal, maybe as people think it is. But I'm sure he's going to have some moments here and there that definitely break through. I mean, we had one last night when Chuck and Dickie V were calling a game, and Bruce is interviewing them pregame, and Chuck kind of gave him the works there. Didn't even answer his question.
Yeah. Do you think we don't have that clip, so people will have had to see it, but Barkley made a comment to the effect of like, oh, I wrote it into my contract this year that I don't have to work with Bruce Pearl because people are coming for you. I mean, they obviously have the Auburn connection. That felt like Chuck might just be really good at being professional and funny while actually expressing his opinion. Like, there was a little bit of me that was like, does Barkley actually not like Bruce Pearl? And this was just like a very telegenic way of saying that.
He does have that magic. I wouldn't put it past him, but I honestly think I think Chuck is an opportunist. He knows where the winds are blowing, with public sentiment, and he probably saw an opportunity to get some digs in and took it.
Sort of crazy that Charles Barkley and Dick Vitale called an actually important basketball game this week.
Right.
But
why didn't they do that for the 16 versus 16 game? Like I
would have been just
pretty
do it
upset
for a random Big 12 game a month ago,
Well, they did do a regular season game on ESPN.
Yeah, exactly. So do that on TNT or whatever, and just call it even. But I have one last take on this for you, which is actually kind of the one I'm most interested to throw at you that I was waiting for. We have talked since last July when the Ellisons took over Paramount about what the imprints on CBS Sports were going to be from a programming and talent and production aesthetic, editorial aesthetic perspective, right? Like, they made the UFC deal. We talked about the NFL deal that's coming. There will be more contracts like that to be sorted out. But like, are they going to get involved with Tony Romo? Are they going to, I guess this Burleson thing, he's staying put on the morning news show, and now he's getting a chance on the Final Four. Is that an example? I think that the Bruce Pearl hire is the first Ellison hire at CBS Sports, because this is a guy who's on Fox News. The whole country knows Bruce Pearl, maybe more than any other recently championship winning college basketball coach. The average person is going to know this guy more than Jay Wright, more than a lot of other people that could fit this coach character mold that we talked about. Who is Alexi Lawless is exactly who I thought of. Somebody who is not going to be afraid to wade outside of the 94 feet of the court to give a take that feels preposterous, that goes viral on social media, that pisses people off, has a little bit of baggage and interest to him, but draws maybe, what the people at CBS might see as an average person. Can disagree or agree over who that might be and where they fall politically or with their sports interests or whatever, but who kind of represents like a more populist down the middle type of thing that they seem to be wanting to go for. Thoughts?
I don't necessarily agree.
Okay. I could tell by your face, so that's why I wanted you to rebut me.
Yeah, so I do think there's some connections here. And, from what I've gathered about the Ellison family, I don't know if they're so overtly political or overtly right-wing as people are kind of casting them to be right now. I think they have identified a way that is expedient to get their business interests in front of the federal government in a way that is that is good for them. And there is one political issue that they clearly care about, which is Israel. And so there are some certainly ties to what Bruce Pearl has said in the past and the reasons he goes on Fox News, and how the Ellisons feel on that issue. But for what you're getting at, which is kind of a more like a broader interpretation of this move. And let's be clear, Bruce Pearl was hired well before any of the Paramount Warner Brothers stuff happened.
Yeah,
right?
and he primarily works for TNT, not CBS. But by putting him front and center on the selection show, having him in a studio for the tournament, those are things that can be decided upon as the situation moves. Is that fair to say? I mean, it's not like it was a lock. He might have wanted this, but
yeah, I don't know. It just seems it seems really small potatoes for the Ellisons, or because let's be real. Like the individuals, the executives making talent decisions for the NCAA tournament probably aren't having a lot of conversations with David Ellison. Like Dave Burson at
wouldn't
CBS.
You just say sports in general is small potatoes?
No, because sports is kind of the thing that's keeping these linear TV assets.
Then what's a talent decision that you think I should be watching for that would be something that the Ellisons would care enough to meddle into? Because you just said the selection show is the biggest platform for these studio talent guys. Millions of people watch it. More people watch the selection show than watch the nightly news on CBS right now. I know it's one day versus every day, but you get my point. It's a real platform.
Yeah, I could see, if they had thoughts on the NFL talents, like maybe, that's probably the one part of the sports division that would be subject to meddling from the highest of the high, right? I think everything else is pretty minuscule in the grand scheme of things, especially when you consider just everything else that goes into this deal. I mean, even, take the NFL out of it, right? Because like obviously the NFL is existential for these broadcast networks. But if we're just talking about sports, like I don't think they really care about the presentation in a way that is going to make its way down to who's going to be on a studio show for March Madness. I don't know.
To be clear, I also, I was intentionally, I don't mean to make an assertion that like the beliefs on foreign policy and things like that are guiding this, but I just mean that Bruce Pearl, because of that, but also just it is a fact of the matter, is very present for people who just consume news and culture and sports in a way that a lot of other coaches just have not ever broken through to be. He does happen to be from representing a southern state and having more conservative beliefs and being, what a lot of people would say is a more run-of-the-mill guy. You know what I mean? And so I think that is the type of personality that I have felt like CBS And maybe you say they're chasing after Fox in that way. That's been a business model of Fox's across all their sports for a long time. I felt like, hey, this could be their in. But you're right. I mean, it's not none of these sports broadcasts outside of the NFL are a massive enough thing that it's going to really, they're not going to sway people's opinions about life and the world by who they put on an NCAA tournament broadcast. But they have to care a little bit as to who these people are and who's getting hired. Otherwise, why deal with any of it?
Yeah, I think these are all good reasons for just run-of-the-mill executives at CBS and TNT to want Bruce Pearl on the show, right? Like, he is more recognizable than 99.9% of coaches you could put in that role, in large part because, you know, he's appearing on Fox News, the most watched cable news channel in America, you know, with relative frequency, right? Like, there's you know, value in that if you're CBS and TNT. So I think that's a good reason to have him on.
When Tony DeCopel takes over for James Brown, we'll really know that the imprint is being made here. Let's get to Big Cat versus Ken Rosenthal, Drew, a controversy that slid beneath your omnipresent attention for a moment until I got you educated on it. And then we did hear a follow-up shortly before we recorded here on Wednesday. I think this is typical Barstool stuff in a lot of ways, right? It's Dan Katz, host of Pardon My Take, taking a shot at a random media guy who, relatively speaking, is unpopular compared to others. And establishment, been around, easy guy to put a target on, right? And having all the fans cheer him on. And then whatever, you back down, but your point was made and you kind of got an easy win. That's how I see the Big Cat side of this. He on Monday's Pardon My Take, seemingly out of nowhere, basically just because Rosenthal interviewed Paul Skeens after the semifinal win that Team USA had in the World Baseball Classic, just kind of went on a mini rant about Rosenthal, referring back to this incident last year at a Brewers game that Fox broadcast where he stared down a cameraman who he had bumped into in a really aggressive looking way. Rosenthal apologized for this. It was also 7 months ago, and yet Big Cat brought it up as one of the reasons that Rosenthal should get the fuck out of here. Called him a loser, called him a jerk, said this should have been a career ender, and asked why we let Rosenthal interview these players. And then sports media almost universally came to Rosenthal's defense. Also not a surprise to me, Drew. So before we get to Big Cat's apology, your thoughts on this very sudden and random feud that emerged between a Barstool podcaster and a Fox MLB insider?
I actually have a take here, which is surprising because I didn't think I'd have a take. I think Big Cat is kind of directionally correct that like Rosenthal is he's a dork. Like, look at him. Like, I think this is why, like, I hate to do this because this is completely unfair. Right. And I'll get to why. I'll get to the rest of my take in a second. But his appearance, I think, is a big reason why people do not like him, or maybe the general public that watches Fox Baseball's coverage doesn't like him. He's wearing a bow tie. He's a little mousy. Like,
he's short.
And these are not reasons why we should be making value judgments on a television personality. But I think this is part of it, right? Like, I think this is a valid reason why people, well, an invalid reason, but a real reason why people probably dislike him. He just looks like a bit of a geek, right? And then there's kind of his role on Fox, right? He's interviewing players in the middle of a game, right? And a lot of times, to his credit, he's asking them challenging questions, right? He's not going for the layup questions. And so that is in itself just confrontational, right? They're doing their jobs. They're playing baseball at the highest level, and you're kind of bombarding them with questions that might be better suited for the locker room or a press conference or something like that. And I think that also draws a lot of hate and criticism, even though he's doing, what I think many people in the media and journalists would say is a good job. Like, you're getting answers to these questions we all probably want to know. So you take his appearance and you take where he is doing his job, and it becomes a situation where it's kind of understandable that people have a negative opinion on this guy. And then, of course, you have instances like the Milwaukee Brewers stuff and
which was genuinely weird. And he looked
weird.
Awful in that situation. Credit to him for owning it and apologizing immediately. But sometimes I think it's fair to judge people by their actions more so than their words. There's also been coverage things. There was a Padres column a while ago that Rosenthal got a lot of flack for, also had to apologize for, where he made some weird generalizations about the attitudes of Padres players and things. And, that's a heavily Dominican team at the time and stuff like that. Like, there are some things. I would also say, though, to your point about the types of questions, I think your other point about the situation in which he's asking those questions is super spot on. I hadn't really thought of it that way, but it does feel like an interruption to the baseball on top of being very direct questions. But you said things that are better suited for a press conference or whatever. I would say questions that oftentimes aren't even getting asked of athletes a lot these days about, I wouldn't say it's like gratuitous, but online controversies or very kind of like personal behaviors or things that they were sort of seen doing or questioned for doing on a more personal level, not these generalities about what did you think when you got your single in the third and there were two guys on and whatever. It's like that stuff is so rare, I feel like, in 2026 to happen at all, that seeing it on a big time, big four sports broadcast in the thick of action, you're absolutely right, is jarring. And again, an easy thing for somebody like Big Cat, who kind of holds the perspective of the fan and tries to maintain that a lot, to poke at and make fun of and criticize.
Well, and here's the thing, and this is kind of where I landed after thinking about this for a little in the past 24 hours. I don't think it actually is the time and place to ask those questions. And I think Fox is kind of doing Rosenthal, who, by all accounts, and let me be very clear about this, is a great journalist. Like, so many people in the media stood up for him as A, being a good guy, but B, just being really good at his job.
Yeah.
I think a different role, and a role that might be more suited for his skill set, and a role that might be more appreciated by baseball viewers, would be something more akin to like what Jay Glazer or Jonathan Jones does on NFL pregame shows. And that's kind of be like the insider reporter that's kind of dishing on the hot topics of the day, but in a way where, they have the inside information. People are clearly willing to talk to Rosenthal because he is respected and is that veteran presence in national baseball media. Like, he'd be able to provide some interesting tidbits in that way. And I think people would appreciate what he had to say in those settings a little bit more than being in the dugout in the middle of a game and asking players or managers sometimes difficult questions.
Yeah, he asked Mark DeRosa in the middle of a World Baseball Classic game about the confusion over the qualification rules and the controversy that ensued over DeRosa intimating that he didn't know if the U.S. had qualified for the quarterfinal or not. And that's during a game that he's managing. That is very unorthodox. Yeah, I would say, I guess it kind of feels like Fox intentionally trying to create some of these viral moments or add some spice to the monotony of a baseball broadcast. You can't exactly fault them for that. I think Rosenthal does it relatively professionally, even if it is a potentially, like, within the format of it, an unprofessional situation that he's being put into. You could make the case, and it sounds like you are. Yeah, that's a fascinating thing. I don't think that their current studio is set up for him to do that with Jeter and Ortiz and A-Rod. I mean, maybe it would have to be a different whole setup entirely to make that happen. But you're right. Also, Tom Verducci is doing a version of this at the same time. And that dynamic, which has been added more in recent years, is another strange aspect to this, where I think he's wonderful. Like on the WPC last night, I thought he had some awesome moments interviewing the Venezuelan players after their win. And he's well respected as well, and clearly knows baseball. So now there's two guys kind of doing a version of this. And so maybe that means Rosenthal could evolve. But yeah, he works at The Athletic. He's a reputable guy. He's been in the industry forever. I guess the question is, more so than the media coming to Rosenthal's defense, Drew, would be how do athletes, players, and managers and coaches feel? Because they're the ones who are sort of like the victims of this Rosenthal experiment on Fox's MLB broadcasts, more so than, it's great that Andrew Marchand likes Ken Rosenthal. I could have predicted that one. That's not exactly a surprise. They're coworkers, and they've both worked in baseball media forever. But what does Mark DeRosa think of Ken Rosenthal? That would be a much more fascinating answer. But Big Cat came back Wednesday, we should say, and admitted he went a little hard. He said he kind of didn't intend for it to go as viral as it did. You're welcome, Dan. And, said he has no problem with him working at Fox, was not actually calling for this man's job, but does still perceive him to be kind of a jerk and kind of a square, like you mentioned. The last angle on this, these guys both work at Fox technically. Yeah. And that was an interesting part here, where Big Cat now, by way of this Wake Up Barstool show that the company produces for FS1, and his appearances as kind of the second biggest Barstool personality, I believe the only other Barstool personality to actually appear on Big Noon Kickoff besides Dave Portnoy, is a Fox Sports guy. And of course, Ken Rosenthal is as well. And this controversy happened where Sunday night, the game's on FS1 that Big Cat is ranting about. And then Tuesday morning, when this goes viral, Big Cat's sitting on FS1 on Wake Up Barstool. It's a very fascinating dynamic kind of underlying all this.
Yeah, it's pretty funny. I don't know how much it actually matters. I do. I think it matters zero. Like, I don't think Fox cares. I don't think Big Cat cares. I don't think Ken Rosenthal really cares that they are kind of tied up in this way. That's just kind of the realities of modern media, I think, right? Like,
but modern, like within very much the past few years.
Well,
I mean,
yes,
like, you can call it the Pat McAfee effect or whatever, but this new world where you're kind of borrowed, hired hand, and you can just take shots at your technical colleagues with no recourse is sort of crazy. Like, I get why it happens, but
I guess just on the scale of Pat McAfee calling Norby Williamson a rat on ESPN,
from 1 to Norby, it's much closer to 1.
Right? Yeah, it is. Yeah, much closer to the other end of that scale. But it is. Yeah, it's just another data point in that weird kind of new normal that we're in.
All right, that'll wrap us up for Wednesday, March 18th. Back Friday live on YouTube, X, Instagram, Facebook, at Awful Announcing. We're also at awfulannouncing.com, breaking down the latest in sports media, minute to minute, all day, every day. We'll catch you next time.